5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We are live. Coming to you live at Lichtman Live. Say what's up to the people, Dad.
Welcome to our very astute, very brilliant audience that always asks outstanding questions. And you want to give a shout out to one of our donors, right?
Yeah, shout out to George Politis, who, before the stream even started, gave a generous donation. So thank you to George. We'll get your question once we get to the question portion of the show.
Yes. You know what?
What?
We're not going to lead with the war today.
Thank
Amazingly.
God.
You know, there's just so much else going on.
There's some good news.
There is some good news. What's the good news?
The good news is the PBS knockdown.
Yes.
The East Wing ballroom knockdown. That's
exactly.
about it. The rest is bad news.
There is news coming out of the courts, and not just from judges appointed by Democrats. One of these critical decisions was from a judge appointed by one of our most conservative presidents, George W. Bush. So, you know, Trump can't claim, oh, it's just those lunatic, commie, activist Democratic judges who are coming after me. Even John Roberts, the very conservative Chief Justice, reprimanded, didn't use Trump's name, but you know who he was talking about when he said, we've got to stop these attacks on the judges just because you don't like their decisions.
Oh, I'm sure Trump is going to line up right behind Roberts and say, thank you, John Roberts. Thank you for scolding me, and now I will behave. I doubt it.
There were two chances of that, slim and none.
Right. All right, let's get into our first topic of the evening. Who's an American? The Supreme Court could change that definition, Dad. The U.S. Supreme Court is set to hear arguments Wednesday, that's tomorrow, April 1st, in a case that could reshape the constitutional guarantee of birthright citizenship as lawyers for President Donald Trump defend an executive order seeking to limit who qualifies for automatic U.S. citizenship.
You know, we know this court is willing to stretch. We know this court is willing to overturn past precedent. We saw that in the most significant decision in recent years. What did they overturn, Sam?
Roe versus Wade.
Right. But that decision was based on a lot of constitutional inference, right?
Okay.
There is no right to abortion or even an explicit right to privacy built into the Constitution.
Okay.
You had to derive those rights from inference. I think it was very solid inference, but it was inference. That is not true of birthright citizenship. Few principles are more foundational or more misunderstood than birthright citizenship. In collaboration with your brilliant mom, Karen Strickler, I have an op-ed coming out first thing tomorrow morning in the Hill, right before the hearing on birthright citizenship, in which I explain not only is birthright citizenship explicitly founded on the Constitution, but when you follow what conservatives claim to be their foundational principles for jurisprudence, that is the plain meaning of the text and how the framers at the time understood it and how it has been applied to this point. Just let me remind you how explicit and plain the text of the 14th Amendment on birthright citizenship is. Quote, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. Equally plain was the intent of the framers. Understand, this is not narrow. It's not provisional language. It certainly is not limited by color, race, religion, or, as we'll explain, the legal status of immigrants. At the time this amendment was enacted, we didn't even have the system that distinguished between so-called illegal and legal immigrants. That didn't come into play until well into the early 20th century. This clause in the 14th Amendment, this explicit admonition
Admonition. That's a big word.
I sometimes use big words. I'm a college professor.
What does that mean?
I'm allowed. Admonition means a warning, a caution. Don't violate this.
Gotcha.
It did not, in fact, establish a new idea, Sam.
Okay.
It constitutionalized. How about that for a big word?
No, I like admission or whatever it was.
Idea. It's called the common law, the Anglo-American common law that rules absent a specific provision of law or provision in the Constitution. Under the common law that had ruled for many decades prior to the late 1860s, citizenship followed birth within sovereign territory. The rule was simple. Birth on soil conferred jurisdiction, which in turn conferred citizenship. I don't see how Trump can claim he doesn't have jurisdiction over the children of undocumented immigrants, because what's he doing to them? He's arresting them, detaining them. If, in fact, they were like the children of diplomats with diplomatic immunity, he couldn't be doing this. Of course, the United States has jurisdiction, both of the undocumented immigrants and of their children born on American soil. In fact, the framers were very explicit about who was excluded from birthright citizenship. It was not the children of so-called illegal immigrants. That category didn't even exist. It was accredited foreign diplomats who have diplomatic immunity, right, Sam?
Right.
Children born to enemy forces occupying U.S. territory, like the British who invaded us in the War of 1812. And at the time, members of sovereign Native American tribes not subject to U.S. jurisdiction. Beyond these very explicit exceptions, the place of birth determined citizenship. Now, why did they feel they had to put it into the Constitution after the Civil War, Sam? Because
of slaves.
Slaves. The Dred Scott decision said Black Americans could never be slaves. Reconstruction lawmakers understood that if citizenship could depend on ancestry, race, or inherited status, it could be denied to anyone. It would be a very shaky concept.
Ooh.
Yes.
That was me visualizing shakiness.
So they wrote the rule in universal terms. Citizenship would attach at birth, not by race, not by parentage, not by status. Didn't matter whether you were white, black, Asian. Didn't matter whether your parents owed allegiance to a foreign power. Didn't matter what your status was in this country. Senator Lot Morrill, Republican of Maine. It was Republicans, by the way, who were behind this.
Well, that was when they were
That's when they were the Progressive Party. Yeah. He explained that birthright citizenship provision of the Constitution did nothing new, but was, quote, a affirmation of a grand and fundamental principle. He asked, and no one responded, could anyone deny that, quote, the native born is a citizen by virtue of his birth alone? Congress acted, he explained, when slavery's abolition demanded a clear rule. The architects of the amendment were equally clear. Senator Lyman Trumbull, author of the preceding Civil Rights Act of 1866, said it would make citizens of everyone born in the United States who, quote, are subject to our laws, unquote, with only the narrow exceptions I just outlined above. Neither race nor immigration status was the dividing line. Supreme Court affirmed this in its most comprehensive decision on birthright citizenship, United States versus Wong Kim Ark in 1898. A very conservative Supreme Court held that a child born in San Francisco whose parents were Chinese citizens who could not become U.S. citizens because at that time naturalization was limited to white people and people of African dissent.
Gotcha.
This was a time of intense anti-Chinese sentiment, including deadly riots on the West Coast. But the justice traced the rule, as the senator said, back to the common law, ruling that the Constitution's language was, quote, general, not to say universal. Birth was within the U.S., subject to its laws, was enough. Even earlier, this is a critical decision. Lynch v. Clark, way back in 1844, a New York court held that an American-born child was a citizen regardless of having parents whose allegiance was to Britain, not to the U.S. The judge wrote, quote, whatever the situation of his parents, birth within the nation's dominion conferred citizenship. Here's something even more telling. As I explained, it wasn't until the 20th century that we had this clear demarcation, which I'll explain really isn't clear at all, as we know if you're following anything about current debates. But the categories didn't even exist. But there were clearly a category of persons who were in the United States in violation of explicit U.S. law and were here unlawfully. You know who they were, Sam?
No.
They were slaves imported into the United States from Africa after 1808, when federal law prohibited the international slave trade. They could not be here legally. They were here illegally. And you know what happened with all their children, Sam?
They became citizens.
Every single one became citizens with no controversy, no debate. Look to a post-1898 Supreme Court decision. Playa v. Doe in 1982 rejected efforts to draw distinctions between those who are here in the U.S. lawfully and unlawfully. Here's a critical point. The court observed that immigration status is not fixed. It shifts with changing statutes and executive priorities. The court said, quote, the illegal alien of today may be the legal alien of tomorrow. And we've seen that, right? With programs like temporary protective status,
right,
which conferred legality on hundreds of thousands, or the DACA program. And we also know this works vice versa, that those who are legal immigrants could become illegal immigrants, right? Because that's what Trump is trying to do with things like temporary protective status,
right,
or DACA. So in other words, the paperwork could shift easily enough, but the Constitution does not shift. That's the critical point. Across generations, through horrible nativist backlashes, racial exclusion, fundamental changes in the immigration law, the principle of birthright citizenship has endured. If you're here and subject to our laws, as they all are, unless they're part of an invading army or the children of diplomats, you are one of us. That's a rule. It's not a loophole. It's not an accident. And it is one of the clearest expressions of American promise, that citizenship is not inherent privilege. It's not dependent on your paperwork, but a status conferred by birth within a nation committed, however imperfectly, to equal protection under the law. I think this closes the case. What do you think, Sam?
So what is the case that Trump's lawyers are making? Do you know? Or will we find out more tomorrow?
Well, we know to some extent.
Right.
They made some arguments. The main argument that they're trying to make is twofold. One, that this was designed solely for the children of slaves.
Right,
I
which
think
you've
I've
debunked.
knocked that down about as clearly as you can.
Right.
Secondly, that illegal immigrants are not really subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. They don't owe allegiance to the United States. I think we've knocked that down pretty thoroughly as well.
Right.
Those, as far as I can tell, and I'm not familiar with everything they're arguing, we'll know a lot more tomorrow, seem to be the two main arguments, and they're totally bogus. Keep in mind, this is not a de novo decision, Sam.
I don't know what de novo means either.
Brand new.
What?
Starting from scratch.
Am I dumb? I don't
No.
know any of these words.
You're just young.
I'm not that young.
Means starting from scratch.
Okay.
There have been a number of lower courts which have not been equivocal in slapping down this executive order designed to abrogate a clear provision of the Constitution, which is totally consistent with the intent of the framers, its plain meaning, and how it's been interpreted by the courts very clearly. You cannot have citizenship dependent on the ever-changing, fleeting paperwork status of immigrants in the United States. Can you have children shifting from day to day depending on Trump's executive orders or the legislation of Congress? That makes no sense whatsoever, as the Supreme Court said in Plyer versus Doe. And I haven't even gotten into, because I'm focused on the history here.
Right.
Think of the practicalities of this.
It sounds like a mess.
What a mess. And remember, they're supposed to be states' rights, right? Limited government. Can you imagine? You'd have to have the biological police checking the immigration status of the parents of every single child born in the United States. And what about those who are citizens but don't have the paperwork?
Now, I see a lot on the right, and I've seen Trump claim this before, that, most countries don't have birthright citizenship, so it's not going to be a mess. Most countries do that. What's your response to that?
It's a mess in those countries, and it's going to be even more of a mess here in the United States because we have a vastly larger population of undocumented immigrants than these other countries.
Right. We're not Latvia, right?
No, we're not one of these other countries that's either a dictatorship like China or a small country with minimal undocumented immigrants.
Right. What do you think the chances are of the Supreme Court actually siding with Trump here?
10%.
10%?
10%.
Okay. So you don't think it's going to happen?
I don't, but I don't rule it out. I don't say it's 1%.
Right.
10% is not impossible. As I see it, Alito and Thomas will do anything Trump wants. I don't think they've ever voted against him.
Right.
Obviously, the three Democratic appointees will vote against Trump. I think Roberts will, because he's an institutionalist. And that means they need one of the three Trump appointees.
Right.
And I think they're likely to get it. This could even be a 7-2.
Interesting.
Because what Trump is trying to do is so outlandish.
Right.
So contrary to everything that conservative judges claim to stand for. Interpreting the plain meaning of the Constitution. Interpreting the meaning as it was understood, especially by the framers at the time of its enactment. And the history is crystal clear. And my article is supposed to come out, The Hill, with Karen Strickler, 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, right before the hearing.
Now, the hearing's tomorrow, but we're probably not going to get a decision until the summer, right? They don't usually make...
Unlikely we'll hear it till June.
Yeah, they usually make their big decisions
The big decisions come out the end of June or, July 1st.
Gotcha.
No, we're not going to hear about this for a long time. And we might not know from the hearing. You can't always tell. Sometimes you can.
Right.
I think in this case, we might be able to tell, because it would be hard for the justices to clearly disguise their questions and disguise their feelings. So I think we'll have some idea tomorrow, but not a definitive idea until June at the least.
Okay. Our next topic is about the Iran war. It wasn't our first topic today.
But it could be our topic every day if we wanted it to be. But I think this birthright citizenship, because it involves a fundamental right, it's part of the Constitution. Conservatives have always stood for strict construction of the Constitution and not reading your political values into the Constitution. If they're true to that, this decision should be 9-0.
Right.
Not to mention their commitment to limited government, which would be totally shattered.
Right. Trump says the U.S. could be done with the Iran war, Dad, in 2 to 3 weeks. But meanwhile, the average U.S. gas price just hit $4 a gallon, as the president told other nations to, quote, go get your own oil.
Yeah, get a bucket and
Yeah.
go get your own oil and swim through the Strait of Hormuz. Who knows with Trump? My analysis of Trump comes from the great poet T.S. Eliot. Decisions and revisions that a minute will reverse. Now he's saying 2 to 3 weeks. Who knows? If he sends ground troops in, it ain't going to be 2 or 3 weeks. It's going to be a long slog.
I think he just made up that timeline off the top of his head.
Yeah, and remember all his timelines for Putin.
Right.
You got to reach an agreement or else.
Right.
And how rigidly did he adhere to those timelines?
Not at all.
Not at all. So you cannot put any faith, any trust in what Trump says. He says whatever he thinks will benefit him at the moment. And as I said, within a minute or two, that could be totally reversed. And I'm sure, frankly, I don't think he has any idea.
He's been attacking, him and Vance have been attacking, our European allies for years. And now that they need them, they were crying for them. And now that they haven't come to Trump's aid, no shit, now they're all mad. I don't know. I don't understand their thinking behind all this.
You trying to say you don't understand Trump's thinking?
No.
Look, he's been dissing our allies for some time. Did he coordinate with our allies in this war?
No.
No. Remember, when George H.W. Bush, a Republican, launched the Gulf War in 1991 or so, what did he do to coordinate? He put together a coalition of dozens of nations, including some of our adversaries as well as our allies, Arab nations. He was totally covered, totally in sync with the world. This was Trump the cowboy going off on his own in a war that, quite frankly, none of our NATO allies would have advised him to undertake. And then he cries, they're not coming to our aid. They're not helping us. Well, what do you expect?
Right.
When you don't do the most minimal due diligence in at least informing, much less bringing on board the way George H.W. Bush did, our allies and beyond. This is Trump, the cowboy, truly going it alone. And then when things go sour, crying crocodile tears and weeping that no one is coming to my aid. Well, tough. What did you expect?
Yeah, and Vance went to Europe, a few months ago and just absolutely shredded them. And what does he expect? Them to come, like you said, to our aid? Doubtful.
In a war that they had nothing to do with, weren't informed about, weren't coordinated with. And now he's saying, get your own oil through the Gulf of Hormuz. We don't need it. Well, if we don't need it, why are gas prices going, I don't know, $1 or more up since the war started?
Right.
This notion that we are so strong and so powerful that we can insulate ourselves from global forces is another delusion that Donald Trump has. And by the way, the American people aren't buying this. The latest poll, 59%, and that is before the latest escalation. That ended March 23rd, about a week ago. 59% said Trump has already gone too far in the Iran war. His approval rating has hit an all-time low for him, minus 21%, something like 36%, and this is an average. One poll had him down at 33%, something like 36% versus 57%. Other averages have had him down 17 or 18 points. But he is deeply underwater. Whatever he is selling, the American people are not buying it. Another poll showed 17%. You never see this. 17% of Trump voters, just a little over a year, regret their vote. We could have told them that if they'd only listened.
Wow. Don't forget to like the stream. It helps us a lot. We have almost 900 people watching. Our next topic. Siding with a Christian counselor in Colorado, the U.S. Supreme Court tossed out the state's law banning conversion therapy. The decision could well invalidate laws in some 24 other states, laws that bar mental health therapists from practicing a version of talk therapy that seeks to change a teenager's sexual orientation or gender identity.
Let me say, I wrote about this. You can check it out in my 2008 book, White Protestant Nation, The Rise of the American Conservative Movement. I wrote a lot about these phony right-wing think tanks that come up with these phony, dangerous, pseudoscientific ideas, like creationism, for example, is one of them. Conversion therapy is another. It's totally bogus. You don't, first of all, it's not just talking, it's trying to force people to change their sexual orientation or their gender identity. It's cruel. It's inhumane. It doesn't work.
It's a scam. Yeah.
It is a complete scam with purpose, with political. It's a political scam, and also, of course, a monetary scam.
Right.
You got to pay,
of course,
to go through this useless, dangerous procedure.
And therapy ain't cheap. I'm sure these conversion therapists are not charging, $2 an hour.
Yeah, follow the money. It almost always works.
But the issue here was that there were some liberal judges who also sided.
2 or 3.
Yeah, who also sided on tossing out the ban because they were specifically targeting free speech.
Yes, that was the issue, that you can't stop people from talking.
Right.
If they were injecting them with something, yes, you could then regulate through the state. But the argument was you can't stop people from talking therapy. It's a very, very tough, line to draw. As I said, I despise conversion therapy, but I can understand why 2 of the 3 liberals joined the 6 conservatives in an 8-1 decision, with only Ketanji Brown dissenting. Very, very tough call, but my own idea is it's more than just talk. It's a scam, and I think you can ban scams.
And they're selling it as some sort of, in a way, a medical procedure.
Exactly, which is within the state's ambit.
Right.
You're absolutely right, Sam. Yeah, so I think there are ways of regulating it. I don't know the exact, wording of this law, but there's got to be ways around this.
Interesting.
You got to be able to ban scams. If I talk you into giving me $5,000 because I tell you I have a phony winning lottery ticket for you,
right?
That's illegal.
Right, but
so why wouldn't the phony, I'm going to talk to you and convert you from your non-heterosexual sexuality, why isn't that cognizable under the law?
I guess the issue is that those type of scams are tied to financial crimes, where maybe that's how they should do it, try to tie this to some sort of financial crime.
Yeah, maybe. That's what I'm saying, we're not lawyers, we don't draft legislation, but if you folks in Colorado and elsewhere want to consult with us, we'll help you draw legislation that gets around this decision. I think it's very possible.
All right. A lot of judge news today.
It's a credible number. We've never seen anything like, Trump always says, oh, we've never seen anything like this. Well, we've never seen anything like this. It's almost a decision a day on some outrageous thing that Trump has done.
Well, because he's governing through executive order, which is not real governing. So when you just throw out tons of executive orders, you're just gonna have to wait for the legal process to process them. And that's why Trump is such a bad president, because he doesn't actually govern. He just throws executive orders out.
Beyond that, not only does he throw out executive orders, but his executive orders are pernicious. If they were positive, like the executive order that freed some of the slaves, Emancipation Proclamation, or the executive order that established FEMA, or the executive order that established the Peace Corps. But that's not what he's doing. He's using executive orders to undermine our democracy and to recast the federal government according to his own political orthodoxy.
Our next topic. A federal judge has knocked down the core of President Trump's executive order barring federal funding for NPR and PBS, saying it violated the broadcaster's First Amendment rights. So now we got a very contrast here. First Amendment saved conversion therapy, but it seems like it may also save NPR and PBS.
Yeah, and you can't say NPR and PBS are a scam. They're not bilking people. They're not selling them some kind of phony cure that only hurts them, doesn't help. They're performing a public service. The only reason Trump defunded them is the only media he wants coming out of the government is once again pro-Trump, political orthodoxy consistent with his views, and most importantly, praise and adulation of Trump himself.
Right. Another federal judge, Dad.
Wow. They're just piling up, and they're not all Democratic appointed judges.
They blocked President Trump from moving ahead with any further work on a massive new $400 million ballroom, the infamous ballroom on the former site of the White House East Wing. But there is a big issue. The East Wing is already destroyed.
Already been demolished, of course. This is a typical Trump MO. Don't wait. Act. Obstruct as much as you can so that court decisions mean as little as possible. They could order him to rebuild the East Wing.
But we're paying for it, aren't we?
Of course. We're paying for all this stuff.
Yeah, I know.
Of course, he's saying his big, beautiful ballroom is being paid by private donations.
Oh, right.
And in a way, that's even worse.
Right.
Because who's donating? The big corporations that do business with the government. Again, follow the money if you want to understand what's going on here.
And I have to believe that if he's ordered to rebuild the old East Room, there will not be many corporate donors for that one. Just a hunch.
Yes, and it won't be done with alacrity either, will it?
No.
He might drag it out till the end of his term. Let me, for those who don't understand, this ballroom is like 50% or more bigger than the entire White House. I'll repeat. God. It's 50% or more larger.
I didn't know that.
Yes, people don't realize that. Than the entire White House. I believe it's 89,000 square feet, and the entire White House is 55,000 square feet. Think about it. What a monstrosity. And what horrible taste Trump has. He thinks, if you gild everything with gold and you try to make it look like, it's the Versailles Palace of the Sun King of France, that's in good taste. Thomas Jefferson, the great believer in Republican simplicity, has to be turning over in his grave.
Definitely. This is some breaking news that happened a couple hours ago. I don't know if you even saw this, but Trump signs a new executive order on voting. President Trump on Tuesday escalated his efforts to reshape American elections, signing an executive order that seeks to create a list of U.S. citizens who are eligible to vote in each state and instructing the U.S. Postal Service to send mail-in ballots only to verified voters. Trump told reporters in the Oval Office that he believes the order is legally foolproof.
It's a legal disaster, but it's even worse.
Oh.
It's one of the worst attacks on our democracy we've ever seen. This idea of verifying voter rolls is nonsense. It's worse than nonsense. It's a dangerous blow. I repeat, a dangerous blow on our democracy. How often do non-citizens vote in U.S. elections?
Very rarely, almost. I mean, they have no impact on the outcome.
Zero.
Of elections.
I mean, the percentage is so small you can't even calculate it. You've heard me say this before, and I'll say it again. If you're an illegal immigrant or just a non-citizen, forget about illegal immigrant, just non-citizen, your chances of voting, your chances of being hit by lightning are greater than your chances of voting in a U.S. election. So, this notion that there's a problem with non-citizen voting is a complete Trump fabrication. It is an outright gross lie, self-serving lie that has been debunked time and again. So what happens when you go through these very fraught matching exercises.
People get
You
thrown
knock
off.
out U.S.
Yeah.
citizens. You'll knock them out by the hundreds of thousands if you impose this all over the country. I don't think he can force the states to do anything because he doesn't have authority over the states. Election administration under the Constitution is left to the states, with Congress legislatively having the power to modify what they do. What is the power of the president over elections, Sam?
None. I don't
None.
think. Yeah.
He has no role. The scary part
Ugh.
that he might be able to do
What?
is manipulate the post office
Right.
to
Yeah.
limit those they send ballots to. That is really frightening. I think it's unconstitutional to, force the post office to limit those who they send ballots to. But again, if this goes to the courts, will it get decided before the midterms?
Right.
And B, even if it does, are they going to listen to the courts? It's insidious.
Colin in the chat says that Trump said he would defund the states if they don't comply to this executive order.
He can't defund the states. He has no power to do that. But again, it's got to go through the courts. It's going to take time. He is the most powerful person in the world. And he is as bad as any he's as bad as foreign dictators when it comes to using his power, not to advance democracy, not for the good of the American people, but for his own financial and political benefit. That is truly frightening. And this executive order is one of the most frightening things we have ever seen, Sam,
Really?
in the history of the United States.
Oh my God. That's
If
not
it
good.
goes through, we're never going to have a free and fair election until we get another president.
Yikes. We're almost at 400 likes. Make sure you like the stream.
We ready for questions?
So one more topic. Is that okay?
Okay, we're getting pretty far into it.
Just trust me, man.
All right, I always trust you.
Federal agents arrested more than 3,700 Minnesota residents during the federal government's surge into the state this winter, according to the new data released through a federal lawsuit. Data shows that 3/4 of these ICE arrestees in Minnesota had no criminal record. None.
You know who's not surprised, Sam?
Bing, bing, bing.
What have I been saying for months? That over 70% of those, and I was saying this nationwide, not just in Minnesota, over 70% of those they arrest have zero criminal record, and most of the rest, what kind of record do they have? Minor violations, like minor traffic violations, like driving without a license or an illegal left turn. A tiny percentage are truly the worst of the worst, which Trump claims he's targeted in his immigration crackdown. Of course, another huge lie, a big lie, because exactly the opposite is true. His crackdown targets far more alleged undocumented immigrants with zero criminal record than those with some kind of serious criminal record. And by the way, most of those with a serious criminal record, where are they anyway? Sam, you know where they are. Those with a serious criminal record, they're in prison.
Right.
That's where they're getting them from.
You confused me for a second, and I was like, where are they? I don't know.
You've said this many times. That's
Well,
why.
I've said that, yeah, when you commit a crime and you're an illegal immigrant, you still get arrested.
Right.
You go
Well,
through
you
the
got to put
judicial
them in prison.
process,
They're
and
not
then
like they're
ICE
roaming
comes
the
in.
streets.
Right. Well, there might be some.
Some might be, but most of them are not.
I thought you were making, because you always make the point that you can't catch them, the more serious
Right.
criminals.
Either they're in prison or you're not going to catch them. That's
Right.
right. There's no big sign on some community that says serious
Right.
criminals live here.
Right.
The easy people to catch, and the ones they're catching overwhelmingly, are good, law-abiding persons who contribute to our economy, raise families, pay taxes. Those are the kinds of people they're picking up, not the murderers and the rapists.
Is there a big sign on your door that says "Tough guy lives here"?
Yeah, I think there should be on our door.
Right. That's what I'm. That was the joke I was making.
I got you.
Okay. All right, with that, we will move on to the question portion of our show. Before we do so, some housekeeping. We have over 900 people watching. We're at 400 likes. Let's make sure we get that like number up. It helps us a lot. Subscribe if you're not subscribed. Turn on that notification bell so you know we're live. Share our streams and
Donate.
Donators and members get priority for the question portion of our show.
Yeah, we've been.
Oh, somebody pointed out to me that donators is not a word.
Not a word.
They said that I should say donors.
Donors. I think that's
okay.
right.
I forgot. I saw a comment somewhere saying that.
Donors is the proper word.
Donors. I always say donators.
We love our donors.
Donors.
They keep us going.
All right. Someone said there should be a serious criminal sign above the White House.
It should be 34 felons. Hey, before we get to that, I need to brag a little bit.
Okay.
You remember it was about a week ago. They had the special elections in Florida.
Yes.
For 3 Republican seats.
Yes, I remember that.
And the state Senate seat, which had been solidly Republican, was too close to call. A week ago, who called it?
Alan Lichtman.
Yes. And just yesterday, a week after, they certified the Democrat that I called as the winner was now the official winner. They're only a week behind.
Good job, Pops.
Thanks. I don't think I've missed one yet on any of these special or off-year elections.
I don't think you've missed one since the 2024 presidential election.
But that was different. That was a prediction. This is a call.
No, I'm saying you haven't missed one on the night of Kamala's loss.
I didn't miss that either.
Right, even though you predicted she was going to win, you called her loss very early,
before anyone else.
Right.
I owned up to it. Unlike the pollsters who, it's 20% here, 60% there, it can go either way, so it can never be wrong.
Right. All right.
I need my soda.
Soda break. Oh, we're supposed to take off the it's going to take too long. Who cares?
I'll just turn it this way.
It doesn't matter.
Put my hand over it.
No, it's fine. Big donation from our good friend George Politis to start off the question portion of this show. Professor, can Donald John Trump actually use the Supreme Court to repeal the 14th? Because don't you need to adhere to the ratification procedures in Article 5 of the Constitution, needing approval from Congress and the states, as demonstrated by the 18th being repealed by the 21st?
He's referring to the Prohibition Amendment.
Right.
The only amendment explicitly repealed. You're absolutely correct, of course. To abrogate the clause, you would have to have another constitutional amendment, which of course will never happen. We haven't had a significant constitutional amendment since the 70s, early 70s, which was the 18-year-old amendment. It's impossible in this polarized politics to get 3/4 of both houses of Congress and 3/4 of the states to agree to a constitutional amendment. So they're not trying to abrogate the amendment like they abrogated the Prohibition Amendment. What they're trying to do is get the Supreme Court to reinterpret the amendment, to interpret it in such a way that it excludes from its ambit undocumented immigrants. So the clause would hold, but the interpretation of the clause would change. For example, in a positive way, Brown versus Board of Education reinterpreted the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Under Plessy versus Ferguson, from that same conservative court, by the way, that granted birthright citizenship to the child of Chinese immigrants who couldn't become U.S. citizens, Plessy versus Ferguson interpreted equal protection to be equal funding, and of course Brown versus Education said no, segregation is inherently in violation, reinterpreting the same clause without, of course, altering it.
This is from Philip H. If Trump argues, quote, illegal immigrants are not subject to the laws and jurisdiction within, doesn't that mean our laws cannot apply to them? They can break the law and not be held accountable.
That's exactly the point I made.
Right.
They're not like the children of accredited diplomats who have diplomatic immunity. If, in fact, as this listener points out, they were not subject to the jurisdiction of the U.S., not only could they commit crimes like the children of diplomats and not be held accountable, you couldn't arrest and deport them because you have no jurisdiction over them.
Right. And
It's absurd. It makes no sense.
And like I said, most undocumented people who commit crimes go through our judicial process, right?
Of course, they're subject to our jurisdiction.
And then ICE comes in and can execute deportations. So, right, it nullifies all of Trump's arguments about trying to...
And they have to pay taxes, by the way.
Right.
They're, of course, subject to our jurisdiction. The argument makes absolutely no sense. They're trying to reinterpret it as allegiance to a foreign government, not try to reinterpret in a totally distorted way the meaning of subject to jurisdiction. But the courts have made that clear, in that critical 1844 case. They said even parents who explicitly said they owed allegiance to Britain, their children were still U.S. citizens. Status of the parents didn't matter. And the Plyer Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, made this critical point that being an undocumented immigrant is not an inherent status, Sam, right?
Right.
It changes all the time depending on laws and executive orders. So someone who's illegal today could be legal tomorrow. Someone who's legal today could be illegal tomorrow. And the court made clear you can't turn birthright citizenship on that kind of paperwork.
Some people are saying that donators is kosher. They're saying that donators is a word and it works.
We'll check it out.
Now I'm getting confused. All right, this is from Free Throw Guy. Does the next non-Republican president completely abandon Israel as soon as they get the chance? What do you think?
No, I don't think that's going to happen. Americans are still committed to Israel, but boy, Netanyahu has destroyed American support for Israel, just as he's destroyed worldwide support for Israel. He thinks that the security of Israel depends on maximum death and destruction to hostile Arab countries. Could not be more wrong. It's pretty horrible. But I don't think the next Democratic president is going to abandon Israel per se. Remember, you don't have to support Netanyahu to support the right of Israel to exist. And hopefully, by the time we get another president, Netanyahu will be gone.
I do want to challenge you a little bit because while I agree that Netanyahu has wrecked the perception of Israel, especially in America, it's not like Israel's transgression started with Netanyahu per se.
No, but they've gotten so much worse.
Yeah, that's true. This is from Secular Monk. Rubio was quoted saying, quote, "Re-examine the value of NATO," unquote. Between the whole Greenland thing and the Iran war, how much longer will the U.S. be in NATO?
I think, first of all, it'd be very difficult for Trump to withdraw from NATO, but he could. I don't think he'll go that far. I think he'll continue to disparage NATO. And I think our allies understand this is specific to this president and this administration, that there can be a restart if we get a Democratic president in 2028. It's not irrevocable.
I don't know if you heard this, but Trump is planning to attend oral arguments at the Birthright Citizenship hearing tomorrow. This is from Ben Weinberg. How will Trump's attendance at the oral arguments affect how the Supreme Court rules? Do you think it'll have any effect?
No, I can't imagine, although maybe he's signaling his buddies, Alito and Thomas, but they don't need any signaling from him. They know where he stands. I think it will have no effect, but if it would have any effect, it would be negative. Roberts does not want to be bullied by the president.
Right. People are freaking out. They think you're drinking a regular Coke. It's a Coke Zero, folks. You will never find this guy drinking a regular soda. No, I think he would rather drink mud water than a regular soda.
I haven't tried mud water.
Okay, well. Our next question is from Robs. They say, "Hi, Professor. Artemis 2 is supposed to launch tomorrow. Do you have an opinion on America returning back to the moon, Or is this just a big waste?
I love space exploration, and I applaud the idea of going back to the moon, but I'd rather see the money spent on Medicaid and food stamps.
This is from Jim Blowers. At No Kings, the Tin Man had a sign saying that ice has no heart, the Lion one saying that Republicans have no courage, and the Scarecrow one saying that Trump has no brain. Do you agree?
I think those are wonderful memes. I appreciate them.
Nice. I appreciate them too. This is from Nixon the One. Love the insight. Keep doing good work. Thank you. I think Trump might be the worst U.S. president now behind Andrew Johnson. This second term is worse than anyone could have imagined. Do you agree? And thanks for becoming a member, Nixon, by the way.
I think he is. I would not have ranked him below Johnson on his first term, but I definitely rank him as the worst American president. And I have a book coming out on this. I have a book on everything, right, Sam?
Not on the opera.
No, not on the opera.
Right.
But this September, my book on the great American presidents is coming out. Then the following year, 2027, my book on the worst presidents is coming out. And I think in his second term, he has sealed his position as the worst American president, which is saying a lot, Sam. It's hard to be worse than Andrew Johnson. He was an unmitigated racist, a disaster, the first president to be impeached, went nowhere after his misbegotten presidency. So to be below Andrew Johnson, that's the seller.
Right. This is from Turbid TG1. They say, I think Dems keep the Senate and win 4 Senate seats, but Fetterman decides to switch to the GOP and screws the Dems over. What do you think?
I don't think Fetterman is going to switch. We just had him now coming out against the SAVE Act, which is very important on Fetterman's part. Republicans are almost, not quite, but almost 100% behind it. And I do think, unless Trump messes up the midterms, and, if he messes up the post office, that's going to be pretty bad. And he has a lot of power to do that. And, there are so many ways he can mess up the midterms, and I think he's going to try. But assuming, and that's a big assumption, a free and fair election, I think it's at least 50-50 that the Democrats will take the Senate and 90-10 that they'll take the House.
Thank you to John Tier for donating a membership.
Nice.
Manu John says, who will win 28? Predict right now.
You're not going to make me do that.
Sorry, Manu John.
Too early.
This is from Costly. Trump has no outs and is pushing all in with Israel. Boots on the ground in Iran is an unaliving mission for U.S. troops.
Unavailing.
Every U.S. general should know this inherently. What can the rest of the world do to stop this insane geopolitical disaster? Will they even do anything?
What can they do? I think he's already got 50,000 troops in the Mideast region. They have the capacity to land those troops either on one of the islands like Karg Island or on the mainland of Iran. And there's nothing any other country can do other than verbal dissuasion and verbal condemnation. But the American people really have spoken through the polls and through their feet in the No Kings rally overwhelmingly, including Republicans, like something in the order of 70% of Americans oppose the idea of putting boots on the ground in Iran. What good did it do us to put boots on the ground in Iraq and Afghanistan, Sam? Didn't. Just piled up the casualties.
According to Merriam-Webster, donator is a word.
All right. So you were right on, Sam.
I like it better than donors.
Donator is much more descriptive.
Donors sound like we're PBS. Thank you to donors like you. We are sort of like PBS in a way.
We do.
Walter Lichtman was mentioned in a previous stream. Lichtman wrote the book Public Opinion, where he coined the term stereotype and pseudo-environment, meaning the public does not have an accurate depiction of society, but rather their views are morphed by their biases. How can we create a more stable imagery of democracy with a divided government and an embattled media in this day and age?
Yeah, I have a book on this too.
No,
Sam.
you don't.
Yes, I do. 13 Cracks.
Oh.
Repairing American Democracy After Trump. I have a whole section, which I will commend to you, on how we can restore what you want, truth and stability into the media, including social media.
Really?
Yes.
You're a
I have a whole set of prescriptions for that.
You're a social media guru now, huh?
Oh, kind of. But everything I know about social media, I learned from your mother.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Have you heard of climate, quote, superfund laws? A handful of states like New York and Vermont have passed them to hold oil companies financially accountable for their role in polluting the environment and use the money to help fight climate change. Do you like this idea?
I love it. This is an idea that's spreading all over the world. There are now these suits accusing, quite accurately, the fossil fuel companies of endangering all of us by what their operations is doing, kind of like the suits against the tobacco companies, for example. We just saw, I thought, a much weaker case, the suits against the media companies, right?
Which ones?
Meta and Google.
Oh, the mental health ones?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and the consequences of burning fossil fuels are vastly clearer and infinitely more dangerous. They threaten our very survival on the planet. And again, I have a book on this.
No.
Yes.
What was this
2017.
one? Yeah.
The case for impeachment. I had a whole chapter accusing Trump and his allies in the fossil fuel industry of a crime against humanity by destroying our planet and recommending, among other things, these kinds of lawsuits. That was 9 years ago.
You should write a book about the history of the Yankees and the Giants. That might sell.
That might. How about a book about the opera?
No. To what extent, here we go. To what extent was the Bolshevik revolution driven by Lenin's leadership versus the conditions in Russia at the time? And could Russia have developed into a more democratic system if Lenin had not come to power?
You know what I think about counterfactuals?
Pointless?
Yeah, who knows? But in terms of the more conventional historical analysis, my view is always it's a combination of the circumstances of the times and of the leaders who rise to deal with those circumstances. Certainly Lenin was one of the more indispensable leaders, but without the horrific conditions under the czars in Russia, without the horrific war that was so devastating, who knows how different things would have been.
Thanks for reminding me, Free Throw Guy. We had a poll running this whole...
We did?
Yeah, I think Savannah put it up earlier.
Oh.
Should birthright citizenship remain in place? 862 votes. That's a lot.
That's a lot.
84% say yes, keep it as is. 9% say no, it should be changed. 3% say it depends on the case. And 4% say they're not sure.
So what is it, 84%?
84% say keep it as
That's
is.
incredible. You can't get 84% of people to agree on how to spell their name.
Right. How do you spell your name?
A-L-L-A-N.
That's unique, right?
That's unique.
I want to give a shout out to some donators. That is a word. So whoever called me out on that, it is a word. Limited Light, thank you. And I think that Jeff Schumer, John Tier, D-Cause, Turbid.
Yeah, the donations keep us going. We really appreciate them. You know, the cable outlets, the network, they spend millions of dollars putting on their news and commentary programs. We do it on a shoestring.
And it's always free to like the stream. We're almost to 550 likes.
Nice.
So don't forget to like. Shout out to the replay crew. Whoever's still here watching this on the replay crew, shout out to you. I know we shout out people in the chat a lot, but we also love people who watch it after the fact. Some people are in different time zones. Some people aren't available at night. So shout out to the replay crew, right, Dad?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, absolutely.
Watch us anytime.
Anytime?
Anytime.
What about 3:32 a.m.?
Absolutely.
Okay, there you go.
Hey, there are, people who work the night shift and can catch us.
That's true. With that, we will wrap up Lichtman Live for this evening. Thank you all for watching. Dad.
Check out our op-ed.
I didn't finish.
Oh, I thought you were done.
Dad, what are your final words to the people?
Check out the op-ed with myself and Sam's mom and my wife, Karen Strickler, the brilliant Karen Strickler. 8 a.m. tomorrow, right before the hearing, very timely, in the Hill. It's, pretty much what I presented to you this evening, and I think it's pretty irrefutable history.
I think next week we should do a donors or donators poll because there's still people arguing about this in the chat.
All right, we can do that.
Or not next week, on Thursday.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Good night.
You doing after?
No after show.
No after.
Good night.
Good night.